Last week we launched a series called Dangerous Prayers, and the end of the message was a message called Search Me, and it was from a song that David wrote, a dangerous song, because he asked God to search him. And the thing about when you ask God to search you, it's one of those prayers that God tends to answer. And if you don't want God lifting the veil, looking behind the curtain, digging and prodding and scratching, by the way, he already knows everything that's going on. But if you think that he doesn't and you don't want him to find out, don't pray that prayer. It's dangerous because he'll answer it. So here's what I said at the end of the message last week. How many of you want to join me in praying the dangerous prayer every day for this 7-day period? And I was really encouraged that about 80% of you put your hands up. Now, it's not practical for me to vesper around the Perth metro area 7 days a week, knocking on your door, checking in that you did actually do it. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands of who did and who didn't do it. I will say this, though, if it was important to you, you would have done it. And in fact, if I said this to you, if you could bring me proof, if I said this last week, if you could bring me proof next Sunday, every single one of you, this is open invitation. If you can bring me proof next Sunday that you prayed that dangerous prayer like you said you were going to, if you bring me proof that you did it every single day for 7 days, I will give you $5,000 cash, no questions asked. And you say, what? Sorry, did you have $5,000? Yeah, I said $5,000. So you're saying if all I have to do is pray 2 sentences, because that's the dangerous prayer, 2 sentences, that if I do that 7 days, so time cost 10 seconds a day, 7 days, a minute and change, that you'll give me $5,000. Yep. No strings attached? Nope. Don't have to give? Nope. I reckon pretty much every single one of you would have prayed that dangerous prayer for 10 seconds every single day and logged that on your little iPhone digital microphone. Because we do what's important to us. We give time to what's valuable. And so I was encouraged to have several of you specifically say to me that you did pray that prayer every day for 7 days. I even had one person say they prayed it twice a day, morning and night. I'm like, geez, man, that's double dangerous. And I even have had some people who share with me some of what God actually highlighted for them that he wants to strip away. That's less than his best. And so the dangerous prayer is a prayer that David prayed to God. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me. It's on the screen. If you think that I'm reading it, I'm not, because that screen doesn't have it on that screen. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me. And I get the last bit wrong because we used to sing this in the Catholic Church and I can't get it out of my head. And lead me in ways everlasting. It's exactly how we sung it too. So that's why I left the Catholic Church. So there you go. That's a dangerous prayer. Take that in as a life prayer, because there's going to be stuff that you'll accumulate that you can pray down the line and God will say, yeah, actually, let's get rid of that. And the other thing I invited you to do is join me in reading the Dangerous Prayer Bible Plan. And again, it's not a big time commitment, although it's the best time you can spend. And I don't want, Neil Watson and I caught up a few weeks ago and we're just talking about the need for us as Elevate Church to be digging in to God's word regularly. If this is the only time you flip your Bible open on a Sunday, I say you're an idiot, because you're missing out, because God's word is life and it's truth, and you're becoming spiritually anemic, spiritually anorexic if you're not consuming God's word in your own time. So I'm encouraged for the people that did that. This week I'm going to be teaching about another dangerous prayer. And today's dangerous prayer is actually going to mess with some of your heads. So is this table if it keeps rocking, so stand by. Perfect. The limit of my handyman skills. Oh, damn it. Didn't even get that right. Today's dangerous prayer is going to mess with some of your heads. Because today's dangerous prayer actually flies against the prevailing culture that we are immersed in Western society, Perth, Australia, every single day. A culture that values comfort over just about everything else. Today's dangerous prayer is going to fly in the face of a culture that values convenience over just about everything else, that values self-preservation over just about everything else, and values security and knowing over just about everything else. And so before I teach on today's dangerous prayer, I think it's only right that I issue some warnings to you so you can decide now whether it's a good time to download Solitaire and for the next 25 minutes play that, and don't listen to me because I'm just letting you know, some of you don't want to pray this dangerous prayer. Like, I'm just saying you don't. Like, trust me when I let you know, some of you will not want to pray today's dangerous prayer. Okay, so because here's the warnings. If you love comfort more than you love Jesus, do not, under any circumstances, pray today's dangerous prayer. Okay? If you love convenience more than you love God's calling and want to fulfill it, then don't pray today's dangerous prayer. If you think that you're on this planet to merely pay the bills, not piss too many people off, and one day get into heaven relatively unscathed, do not pray today's dangerous prayer, okay? I'm a good guy. I'm putting that all on the table up front. Because today's dangerous prayer is a prayer that simply says, God, break me. Now, open the newly refreshed Elevate app and it'll take you to a little story that some of you, if you've been around church world for a while, will be very familiar with. I'm going to read that to you. Just a heads up, we are going to put it on the screen, and I'll let you know so you don't think that you're losing your mind. The version on the screen will not be identical to the version in our app. There's a reason, and you don't need to know. Before I read that, let me put this out there. Have you, just rhetorical question, have you ever asked the question or heard the question asked, why do bad things happen to good people? That's a prevalent question in our society. It's even a prevalent question in churches. Why do bad things happen to good people? The underlying assumption behind that question looks like this, that life is divided into two columns. In one column is the good stuff, and the good stuff happens to good people and it comes from God. That's column number one, and we like column number one. Column number two is the bad stuff, and the bad stuff happens to bad people, and it's not from God. Maybe sometimes we'd be willing to blur the line and accept that sometimes bad things happen to good people who make bad decisions. So, all right, you're not a bad person, but that was a bad decision. So bad consequences, sucks to be you, but we can't always get our head around the idea that why do bad things happen to good people through no fault of their own? That's the bit we struggle to reconcile. How is it that someone who's good finds themselves experiencing things in the bad column? And if God was really doing his job, he'd never let us experience the bad stuff. We'd never experience life in the bad column. We'd live in the good column with the good stuff coming from the good God if he's doing his job. And if he's not doing his job, why would I even bother following him? Some of your friends who aren't followers of Jesus may have asked you that question. Why would I follow God? Because look, obviously isn't very good at what he professes to do, because why do bad things happen to good people? If God's loving. Yeah, but God's not a helicopter parent. God does occasionally let you scrape your knee, like a good parent does. He even lets you fall out of trees sometimes and break a bone or two, like a good parent does, or shopping trolleys. Yes, God protects us sometimes, and yet he also lets us go through some stuff, and I want to talk about that. Luke records this scene where Jesus was gathered with his closest followers, and he was explaining to them how he was about to be arrested, tried, convicted for crimes he didn't commit, nailed to a cross, buried in a tomb that he only had to borrow because he was going to rise again. And he did that over a meal. And this is how Luke recorded the scene. Jesus took some bread and gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, "This is my body, which was given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And after supper, he took another cup of wine and said, "This cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood, which is poured out as a sacrifice for you." I've highlighted those two words, and I'll tell you why. Before I do, though, those of you that have been followers of Jesus and been in church world for a while, and in my case, grew up in the Catholic Church, this is a very familiar scene. This is something that we would point towards what we might call communion, okay? Most of you know that. I appreciate that. And communion can be something that's done corporately across the whole church, and we do that regularly. It can be something that can be done between two people. We do it in Elevate groups. You probably find that communion, in terms of this idea of having some sort of a meal and in the context of remembering Jesus and being thankful for his sacrifice for us, is done many days of the week around Elevate Church. But here's a question I'm asking about this. I'm in. Like, as far as celebrating communion, I'm in. Absolutely, and we do it regularly. Unanimously, Bible experts agree that this is something that Jesus established a pattern of, this communion meal. And if you do it with crackers and juice or whatever, it's not the point, but reflecting back on Jesus and his sacrifice for us, there's pretty much universal agreement around that. Some Bible big brains, however, go one step further to say that this isn't limited. What we're seeing and what Jesus is saying, "Do this in remembrance of me," is not limited to us participating in communion together. But in fact, it's actually a pattern for living. And when you think about it, everything that Jesus did is a pattern for living. We are meant to be being transformed into the image and likeness of Jesus. We are meant to pattern our lives after his life. And two of the hallmarks of Jesus' life is that he was willing to be broken so that he ultimately could be poured. Broken and poured, a pattern, broken and poured. And unless you've been broken, it may be that you cannot fully be poured. So let's talk about that. And let me show you this lady. And she's a champion. She's a prostitute. And when I read stories like the one I'm about to show you, I'm reminded that people who weren't like Jesus liked Jesus. Jesus didn't just come on December 25 for church people. We don't have a lock on him. In fact, we're meant to share him. And he didn't shoo people away that weren't like him. In fact, he called them to him. And so this prostitute breaks through the Secret Service security barriers and makes a beeline to Jesus. And before they could shoo her away, this is what happened. Mark records it. And in fact, by the way, this happened not long before the scene that we just talked about of the supper. It's funny that she got it before Jesus actually demonstrated it even to his closest followers. While Jesus was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, another person that religious people wouldn't have been seen in the same house as, but once again, people who weren't like Jesus liked Jesus, and he made time for them. A woman, a prostitute, came in with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. That perfume is reported to have been a year's wages. So whatever you make, that's how much it was worth. AKA more than the one they sell at Chemist Warehouse. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Now, you can go on to read the rest of that for yourself. Of course, religious people got upset. They don't like generosity, freedom, breakthrough. But here's the context. It was really only prostitutes that wore perfume in that day, especially expensive perfume, because it was expensive. And the average housewife didn't have the disposable income to buy perfume worth a year's wage. So what it actually meant for the prostitute is, as she walked the streets by day, by night, as she passed by a dude, that dude, it was like her business card. He would go, I smell me some prostitute. And he'd know, and she wouldn't have to tell him. And if that's what he wanted to do next, he'd approach her, and I don't know what happens after that, but and don't Google that. But so this was her. This actually was her form of advertising. And she was taking, and so by the way, you understand how businesses work. You use advertising to generate income, and you use that income to live on. Okay? There's no great revelation there. She used the perfume as advertising to generate income, clientele, who would then pay her money that she would use to live on. What she did, these are dominoes. Domino 1, domino 2, domino 3. Without the advertising, you don't get the clients. Without the clients, you don't get the money to live on. She broke the advertising. She passed out the advertising. She handed over the advertising. Domino number 1. And without domino number 1, she was handing over domino number 2 and domino number 3. This wasn't just about an act of worship towards Jesus, which some of you may have heard it taught. It is that, but it's also about her handing over her security to Jesus. Acknowledging her past. Everyone knew, hey guys, I'm a prostitute. Yeah, I know, we smelt you. But here's the thing, I don't want to be a prostitute any longer. You won't find many prostitutes who want to be prostitutes, but sometimes that's all they can get for a season in their life. And instead of judging her, Jesus let her worship him. Jesus let her come to him and say to Jesus, without words, but with this rich act, this extravagant act, this actual, by the way, to the naked eye, senseless act. I am going to break an entire year's wages here, and in doing that, I'm saying that my past is now my past, and it is no longer my future. I used to put my security in this perfume. I'm now putting my security in you, Jesus. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I don't have any other skills. Why the heck do you think I became a prostitute in the first place? But here's the thing, I don't know, but you do. I don't have to know. My security doesn't have to come from me and what I've got and what I can accumulate and what I can hold on to and what I can know and what I can learn, but I can put my security in you and not just distance myself from my past, but trust you with my present and trust you with my future. I am willing to be broken so that my life can ultimately be poured out for something better than being a prostitute. About a decade ago, I read something from Rick Warren. Now, Rick Warren leads a church called Saddleback Church in the US. He's often called America's pastor, and pretty big deal. I read something he wrote quoting a Bible heavyweight called A.W. Tozer. Nobody knows what his real name is. A.W. Tozer, and that's not true. And This is what I read. Rick Warren quoting A.W. Tozer, "It is doubtful whether God can bless a person, man, greatly until he has hurt him deeply." This is not a great church growth strategy to be representing this as truth. Hey, come to Jesus so you can be blessed. But, before then, you got to get hurt, and not just a little hurt, deeply hurt. And I remember reading that about 10 years ago. And it's not that, and I struggled to read that. Personally, I read that and I'm like, I don't know. And the reason I struggled with that isn't because I didn't want to believe it, but actually it's because that hadn't been my experience pouring my life. I've been called, I knew I'd been called to pour my life out in the service of God. I knew that. And yet somehow at that point in my life, I'd skipped the breaking bit, the being hurt deeply bit. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, that's pretty true for most people, but not me. And again, I wasn't saying it shouldn't be or that I was above it. I was just looking back in my rearview mirror of my own life, and it hadn't been the case. I'd been pretty unscathed up to that point. Leading part of the leadership team of one of Australia's largest churches. I was speaking at churches around the world 6 months of the year. I'd written and published a couple of books that were selling well, blah, 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 blah. And then we knew, Louis and I knew that one day we'd step out from the church we were part of the leadership in and lead our own church. And I thought that when we did, and we handed in a resignation, said it's time to fly the nest and find a church that God's called us to lead. I expected that this, what had been something of a linear trajectory, would just continue. That this church, when we took it over, that it would just explode. And people would come to us and say, Sensei, Taras, how your micro church grow? And we'd be like, yeah, easy, very easy. Wax on, wax off. Basic household chore, you can make anything. And but instead of the church exploding after a year leading that church, we exploded. I got fired, and all of a sudden my 45-degree trajectory. Well, it didn't go at 45 degrees any longer. In fact, it went in all sorts of crazy directions. And all of a sudden, I found myself hurt very deeply. We found ourselves quite broken. And I remembered that maybe what Rick Warren had said, quoting A.W. Tozer, maybe that's true. And if it is true, now what? And here's the thing. I didn't ask to experience life in the bad column. In fact, we're pretty good. We're good. To know us is to love us. My mom thinks I'm pretty good. Louis, most days, thinks I'm pretty good. We're pretty good. And yet, despite the fact that we're pretty good, we were experiencing life in the bad column and asking, why do bad things happen to good people? Actually, you know what? I got to confess. We actually didn't ask ourselves the question, why do bad things happen to good people? Because when you live life with a commitment to being poured out, you don't ask God how could you let this happen to us? You ask a different question. How can you use what's happened to us to make me more effective from this point onwards? One of our former colleagues, who was based in Perth still, emailed me after he found out that I'd been fired. And he's an ex-military guy, so he kind of emails in military lingo. Brandon, you like this? He emailed me, says, sorry to hear about what happened. You guys are fantastic. We're praying for you, all that. And I hope you don't stop looking towards God's calling on your life, because too many good people are leaving the battlefield. And I emailed back to him and said, buddy, I got no intention of leaving the battlefield. God's called me to pour my life out for him, and that's not going to change. I'm going to spend a little bit of time in the MASH unit. That's okay, but I'm going back to the front lines as soon as I can. Often when we find ourselves getting broken, well-meaning friends and family say to us, it's okay. Everything happens for a reason. You ever heard that? You ever had someone say that to you? You ever want to punch him in the face? You ever read that in the Bible? No. Has anyone read that in the Bible? Everything happens for a reason? So if you have, it's a different Bible than the one God wrote. No, not everything happens for a reason. Some things are just shit and they just happen. And you can't control them. You can't stop them. And once they happen, you can't change it. But here's what you should say to people who have been broken. Here's what you should remind yourself if you are getting broken or have been broken. It's something that Paul wrote to the church in Rome, and he said, and we know that God causes everything. See, here's the thing. Some people stop reading at that point in this. And we know that God causes everything. No, God doesn't cause everything, but there's not where the full stop is. And we know that God causes everything to work together for good. So everything that's happened to us, God can cause that to work together for good. I memorized it in my own head in a different version. NIV, it's true. This is the NLT. Neil, did you know that? Yes. For the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. If you know that you're called according to God's purpose, if your life is to be poured out, then you got to trust that even when you're broken, that God can use that. He can take that and he can cause it to work together for good. He didn't say he causes everything, and he didn't say that God makes everything good. Only lets good things happen to us, but he promises us. Paul promises us that God can take everything and cause it to work together for good, for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. This should not be a surprise to any one of you who've just watched the season of The Block. That they go into this once magnificent structure that isn't quite as magnificent. It's now empty, abandoned, it's been broken. And they don't start the process from there and start building forward. They actually break it even more. They actually start knocking stuff out even more. They actually start pulling things down more. Sometimes transformation begins with deconstruction. Some of your future transformation isn't going to be built on what's already in you. It's going to start by God taking some stuff out of you, breaking some stuff. Pride, self-reliance, some of the cultural norms that maybe aren't always evil, but we get them confused thinking they're from God or God's best, and so we live suboptimal lives, and God sometimes strips them from us, breaks them, so that he is the master of repurposing. With God, nothing is wasted. He would win the block every season because that's what he does. And when you're someone who's experienced brokenness, you now have a front row seat alongside somebody else for when they experience a similar level of brokenness. You will have a greater level of empathy that somebody who hasn't been broken in the same way could ever have. You know, I deliberately don't say to somebody who's being broken in a way that I haven't been broken, I never say to them, I can imagine what you're going through. You know what I say to them? I say, I can't imagine what you're going through. You lost someone to a terminal illness, I can't imagine what you're going through. You lost your home, I can't imagine what you're going through. Your marriage broke up, I can't imagine what you're going through. But you know who can? People who have lost someone to a terminal illness, people who have experienced divorce in their life. And that, by the way, may be you. You got broken. You didn't see it coming. It wasn't your fault. And God didn't stop it. And I don't always know why he does stop some things and doesn't stop others. I don't know. You know why I don't know? Because I'm not God. And I ain't applying for the job either. But he does allow us to get broken. And when we do get broken, if we're committed, allowing ourselves to get broken and committed to being poured out, he will take that brokenness and use it for his purpose in your life. And we have to trust that that's how he works. I reworked the English language by coming up with this. God's greatest breakings, that's not a word, often lead to life's greatest blessings. Or to say it differently, your greatest misery can become your greatest ministry if you allow God to repurpose your brokenness and commit to being poured out. Now, those of you like me who grow things to eat, you are aware that food doesn't grow on supermarket shelves, but typically comes out of the ground. What I'm about to show you won't come as any great shock, but some people, this is news. When you grow stuff to eat or smoke, apparently, you same process. It starts with a seed. And you know, we can preach about the seed, and there's a time for that. Not today. We can preach about the need to put that in the soil, and there's a time for that. And it's about to sow. You can't reap if you don't first sow. But we won't today. We can talk about the importance of which soil you sow into, and we've talked about that before, and we'll talk about that again. The one thing that doesn't get much airplay is this. This is the process. The one thing that doesn't get much airplay is this stage here. Let's call it stage 2. You notice what happened is that seed, which is designed to ultimately bear fruit, will not bear fruit merely by being placed in the ground. That seed will not bear fruit merely by being put in good soil. That seed will only bear fruit if at some point in the process it allows itself to be broken. Only if the seed allows itself to be broken will it ultimately be able to produce the fruit that God designed for it to produce. If it's true in nature, it's true in our lives because God's principles apply in the same way. And so I'm finishing now by wanting to pray for a few of you. Some of you are in a broken phase right now. You are not going to walk away from here saying, God, break me, because you're currently in it. And if you are, I want to pray for you in a moment. And what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to pray for God to take the breaking away, just so you know. So I'm going to ask you if you want me to pray for you, and if you want me to pray, God, take the breaking away, I'm not going to pray that, so don't put your hand up. what I am going to pray is that you will continue to commit to being poured out, and that through the period or season of being broken, that God will continue to show you what he might ultimately do and use that brokenness to produce in your life. So I'm going to wheel back around to you if that's you this morning. Some of you have been broken in the past. And while there may be some calendar distance between when you were broken and today, you may still have not made sense, again, not of how could God let this happen to me, but how can God repurpose that brokenness? How can, as someone being willing to be poured out, how can you take that and allow me to be even more effective and bear more fruit? I want to pray for you. I want to pray for that clarity if that's you this morning. And the third group I want to pray for is those of you who have been broken in the past, and you actually have an idea of why, but you're holding back from allowing yourself to be poured out because you don't want to be broken again because it was painful. And so you're living in your comfort zone and missing the actual opportunity for God to repurpose your brokenness and all that pain that you actually made it through. So those are the three groups. I'm not going to pray for those of you who haven't been broken. You go and pray for yourself. It's a real simple prayer. It goes like this: God, break me. So the three categories, and I'm just going to pray quickly because I'm preaching on borrowed time now. If you're being broken right now, if you've been broken in the past, but you want clarity of how God can use that as you pour yourself out, or if you've pulled back from pouring out because you've been broken and you don't want to be broken again, because, by the way, God doesn't promise that we'll only get broken once. How about you stand up and I'm going to pray for you. And this is a real safe place, by the way. I don't want anyone to see me. You don't have to come up and tell people why you're doing it. We're not going to get T-shirts printed. It's one of the incredible things I love about Elevate Church is that we're a safe place. And we make sure that you know that it's okay to not be okay. And that God doesn't want you to stay not okay. And that's pretty cool too. God, for these people standing, whichever of those boxes that they fall into, whether they're people that you're breaking right now, God, I pray that they will never run from a commitment to being poured out. And that ultimately you would take this breaking and you would repurpose it for your glory through them in the days ahead. That you would bring people around them that won't offer pithy, fortune cookie, cliche comfort, but would do life with them, pray with them, stand with them, walk with them, hold their arms up when their arms are tired. God, for those who have been broken and haven't yet got that greater clarity of how you can use that experience and repurpose things in their life, I pray that you will bring greater clarity into their life, whatever that brokenness looked like. And that they would actually move beyond the third group and become people, and I'll pray for that third group, become people who aren't afraid of being broken again, who aren't afraid of being poured out because they trust you like the prostitute did with their future. Not their circumstances, not their own security, but you, Jesus. And that third group, God, who have been broken and it was painful and no one's pretending it isn't. And have kind of nestled up with their blankie for fear of being broken again. I pray that you would give them fresh revelation, fresh strength, fresh vision that they are called by you to live a life poured out for your glory, for your kingdom, for living the pattern of your son Jesus, for the very people that your son Jesus came to earth to be broken and poured out. In Jesus' name, amen.